again. For those who are just tuning in, my name is Ashley Robinson and I'm the editor of Spud Smart. Thank you so much for attending and the Canadian Spud Congress. I hope you have all had a nice break from our session portion of the event. We're just about to get started on our last few sessions of the Congress, which I know is sad, but I hope you've had a good time attending the sessions over the last few days and have learned a lot. Please remember, if you have any questions for our presenters, type them into the chat box and our presenters will reply to you. Our next session is a grower panel on tillage practices. We have some amazing growers from across Canada who have been experimenting with different tillage practices on their own farms, and they are here today to tell you about their experiences. Ryan Barrett, who is the research coordinator with the PEI Potato Board, will be acting as moderator for this panel. The growers taking part include Chad Berry, who is a partner at Under the Hill Farms in Manitoba, Michael Camps, who is the owner of CP Farms Limited in Alberta, Matt Ramsey, who is a director and operator of Oyster Cove Farms in Prince Edward Island, and Homer Vanderzag, who farms in Ontario. Thanks so much for being here today virtually, everyone. And Ryan, please take it away.
All right. So thank you very much for joining us today with the SpudCon Tillage panel. My name is Ryan Barrett. I'm the research and agronomy specialist with the Prince Edward Island Potato Board. And today I'm moderating a panel on the topic of tillage in potato rotations, and particularly around how growers may be looking at changing or reducing their tillage practices in potato rotations. Today, we have a great panel of growers that are going to be talking to us about what they're doing on their farms, how that's changed over time, and where they see tillage going in the future on their farms. So I'm going to ask each of the farmers in a second to give us a brief introduction on their farm, and we'll put a few slides up. And then after they kind of gave us each a little bit of an introduction on who they are and their farms, then we'll get into a little bit more on a few questions I have for each of them on their practices. So we have Matt Ramsey from Oyster Cove Farms in Prince Edward Island. We have Homer Vanderzag from Ontario. We have Chad Berry from Manitoba, and we have Michelle Camps from Alberta. So without further ado, I'm going to share some slides here. And Matt, I will ask you to take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. My name is Matt Ramsey. I farm with my two brothers and my father, Prince Edward Island. We farm processing potatoes, organic table potatoes, and small grains and pulses. We're fourth generation family farm, and we've all kind of been slowly dribbling back over the last 10 years as we finished our educations and come back to the farm. So we've been practicing residue tillage for probably 15 years now, largely through use of glyphosate, but in some cases finding other places where it fits well. We've largely avoided the moldboard plow now during those years. And really we're just at a point where we're realizing we really just have to get out there and dig if we want to answer any amount of deep questioning about tillage. It's so condition and weather dependent that's kind of where we're at now. We have all the equipment, but none of it works unless you go out and make sure it's a good time to be using it.
So Matt, you guys you grow mostly processing potatoes for French fry production, right? But you also grow some organic potatoes as well?
Yep. Yeah, we have the processing and the organic table, yeah. So yeah, we've been learning a lot about weed control and use of tillage for organic rotations and really trying to find a balance between killing every last weed and over-tilling the soil to the point where you're losing structure and root access, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Homer, I got a few slides here that I'm sharing. Tell us a little bit about you and your farm.
Right. So, hello, folks. My name's Homer Vanderzag. I farm in Alliston, Ontario. It's an hour north of Toronto. I'm a second generation farmer here. My dad immigrated after the war, and him and his brother started farming in Alliston here. And since then, there's 4 different Vanderzag farms. I worked together since '90 with my younger brother Dave. We partnered together for like 17 years. We started HJV equipment in that time, and that was as a sideline. In '07, we sort of reorganized, and he had his kids coming on, and I had mine. So he's running his farm and HJV equipment, as much you might know, and then I'm just focusing on my farm operation, which is on the original home farm. Basically, you grow completely for the chip sector. Ontario is mostly, all the process in Ontario is predominantly chip processing. We are fortunate that we have good proximity to chip markets. So that's what our business is built on. In the last 3 or 4 years, my two of my 3 kids have come on alongside with me, my oldest daughter Karen and my son Garrett, and that's in the midst of that process, that transition, that's going well. So it's a work in process. We store everything that we grow, and our emphasis is long-term storage. So we ship half of our crop in April and May. And what else can I say? Basically, we have a lot of our land base, a lot of light sandy land, and limited land base. Our rotation is too short. It's every second year, so that has its own unique challenges that I guess I'll talk to that later. That's kind of part of the whole premise of this reduced tillage concept, right? So there's some shots of that's my home farm you're looking at there, and the other shot was my storage facility, which is on the other side of Alliston. So that's my intro, I think.
Great, thanks, Homer. Chad, I'll get you to tell us a little bit about your farm.
All right, Chad Berry, a partner at Over the Hill Farms, Under the Hill Farms, and Pleasant Valley Golf Course. It's a family operation with my father, Doug, and my uncle, Bruce, and my cousin, Kevin. We run the farm as a group, and the golf course, everything's run together. We farm 13,000 acres. 2,500 acres is processing potatoes for Simplot. We grow a wide range of crops. We grow corn, dry beans, soybeans, wheat, barley, oats, fall rye, sunflowers, ryegrass, peas, flax, canola, and faba beans. So we try and keep a long rotation. Our spud rotation is generally a 3-year. Some fields are on 4 years. We probably ship 800 acres off the field direct to the factories in the fall, and then the rest is stored in the storage yards. We have 3 storage yards around, trying to locate them centrally to our land. We have always ran the operation trying to innovate and move ahead. We find if you sit back, you always seem to fall behind. So,
that's great. That's great. And Michelle.
Good morning, guys. My name is Michel Camps. I'm an immigrant from Holland. Me and my wife immigrated here. At that time, I was still my girlfriend. In 2000, we worked for other operations. I worked in the potato business, and my wife worked in the hog sector for 2000 and 2001. And in 2002, we had an opportunity to buy, at that time, a small farm in the Barnwell area. We're right off Highway 3, which is our main agricultural corridor here in southern Alberta. Our entire farm is irrigated. You can go to the next slide here. Our entire farm is irrigated. Everything is done with center pivots with water from the Rocky Mountains. So there's no wells here. We drill a well, we get oil. So that's not what we need for the potatoes. We grow in our rotation. We grow primarily processing potatoes. We do grow a small amount of potatoes for the fresh fries market. It depends on how that market looks every year, but it's basically all processing potatoes, and we store the vast majority of our crop. We do also have a farm in Vauxhall, and different than Chad, we truck all our potatoes to the storage in Barnwell. We do not have storages located throughout the countryside. Besides potatoes, we grow sugar beets. It's a unique crop to southern Alberta. There's some in Ontario, but those are not processed in Ontario. We're introducing peas to our rotation. We've been growing corn for a number of years, and mulled barley and spring wheat. Our rotation is usually a minimum of 1 in 4. Most of the times it's longer. If we can access land that is either not owned by myself or that we trade with the dairy guys in the area, we can lengthen the rotation on our own land, we take that opportunity. So we have 5 full-time guys. 3 of them are from the local Mennonite population here. They're very, very good workers, but they might not be very well versed on agronomy. So we do hire extra agronomy staff, usually from overseas, being Holland in this case, that assist me with the crop scouting, pest monitoring, irrigation. Or irrigation is even though it's very well set up, it's still a lot of work. Not sure about other areas, but sometimes our pivots break and then we need to get them fixed and whatnot. So, but yeah, we do trade quite a bit of land with the neighbors, and we work on a straw for manure type program. On our farm, we focus heavily on less reliance on employees. On staff. We like to reduce the number of, especially seasonal staff members that we need. Examples of that is self-propelled harvesting equipment, air sep technology, 8-row equipment for basically everything that we do. And we just try to be as efficient as possible. And for the topic of today with tillage, we try to combine or minimize the amount of tillage that we do on our land. We do that in a way through rotation, and in the other way through combination of tillage passes, but we'll talk about that later.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. That's a great little intro to each of you and what you're doing and how things are going. So my first question to each of you is, how is tillage primarily performed in your potato rotation? So on your farm, what sort of equipment do you use, and how many passes do you normally take when you're preparing to plant potatoes? I'll start with you, Homer.
All right. So, like I said, we're on just a 2-year rotation, so it's not hard to remember. Basically, after combine rolls in August, we'll do 1 pass with a disc ripper, and then we fall ridge everything on our farm. It's a custom unit that we built. It's 10 rows. Basically, that fall tillage pass does 4 operations. It's obviously tillage. It's making the hill. We're typically fumigating with Vapam in the zone at that point in time. We're banding potash in that pass, and then we're broadcasting typically rye in that same 1 pass operation. So that's our fall tillage previous to the potato crop, and then we'll spray that off the last day in October, and then in the spring we use that same tool to re-ridge, the same 10-row machine, which then is sort of rejigged to broadcast our urea, band our phosphate in micros, and spray calcium and spray dual, and then we basically follow with the planter. So that's our fall ridger. And then in the spring, we repurpose it as we call it re-ridging. And there's 2 dry hoppers on it and 2 liquid systems. And then the planter goes through, and it's planting and hilling at the same time. And that's our entire process.
Great. And this is your, so that's your ridger there. And this is your Min-Till planter.
Well, that's our prototype planter.
Okay. We'll talk about that in a second, I guess, then.
Yeah, I have a 10-row planter that follows that unit, which we built about 7 years ago. And it's just a planter and hiller only. We'll talk about the other planter later. So
awesome. Okay, great. Chad, tell us a little bit about what you guys do for tillage right now.
For us, a lot of our fields vary on what crop is coming off before the potato crop, but Most of the ground will get ripped in the fall with a 30-inch eco-till ripper. So it's a very low disturbance ripper, but it opens the ground up loose. We'll broadcast our phosphate, some of it, and our potash on the fall. Come in spring, we will go in with either a deep tiller on 8-inch spacing with a 2-inch spike to loosen the ground up again, and then use a power harrow on some fields. And if it's a lighter field, we'll just use a field cultivator, and then follow with the planters. And the planters are banding the phosphate, and the nitrogen is spread on the spring before the first tillage pass. Some of the ground, if we have a early season crop on it, we'll go in and we'll sow a grass seed and get a nice cover of grass in the fall, and then top or kill it off just before freeze up, and then get the ground ripped, and then just to add a little fiber to the soil. We're also doing some single pass planting right into stubble where the ripper's been through in the fall. We tailor each field. Our land changes from almost clay type soil to real sand, so we have to have different practices across the farm.
Michelle.
Our fall tillage program, we like to follow low residue crops. As I've mentioned before, we do a straw for manure program with some of the dairies close by. So we either bale off or straw, or we would follow like a pea or sometimes sugar beets, but rarely. But normally it's peas or small grains that we follow. We don't always disc rip. We use damodikers, ag engineering damodikers, like what's more common in the US or whatnot. And I believe that 99% of the acres in Alberta get that type of tillage, where we put a big tractor in front of it and we just do the tillage. We don't do any application of products at that time. Many other operations do apply like fertilizer with the floater the day before they damodike it, but we don't. We are not a big believer in fall application of nutrients. So then that's the way it goes in the winter. That's the way it goes into the winter, and then after winter we use what we call a power hiller. Our soil is predominantly heavier than what we see in some of the other growing areas in North America. So the power hiller has been a great tool to break up the clods and the lumps that we do see. It's a pretty intense operation, but we do need that to break up the lumps. And with the planting tool that we have, it's powered by a 500 horsepower Fendt, and I believe you have a picture there from it. It's got the power hiller in the front, and then there's a gooseneck onto the planter, and the planter does all the work all in one operation. We have our liquid fertilizer and our fungicides are in the front 3-point hitch in big tanks, and then we pump that to the planter, and the planter will put down the seed. It will put down a granular insecticide. Usually for us that's Thimet. We will put down the seed piece, of course. We will spray an in-furrow fungicide, and we will add 1034 liquid phosphate. And then we have the hiller on the planter. Big advantages of that is that we do not lose any moisture in the hill between planting or between power hilling and planting. And our potato seed piece, because the hiller is on the planter, is always in the center. I don't care what GPS you have, Case, Trimble, John Deere, ACCO, doesn't matter. I mean, there's no GPS more accurate than the hiller on the planter. I find that the seed piece being in the middle of the hill is very important. So that's the system that we have been using. Oh, here we go. Yeah, that's the planter right there. So this is not a unique system. There's more growers that do that, but as far as I'm aware, this is the only 8-row on 36 inches that works like that. So you can see the tanks on the front, and then the Thimet containers, the white containers that are on the planter. That's our granular insecticide. And this particular field, it's of course a bad example because it's going into flat ground. This is very, very sandy ground, but usually when we go into heavier ground, it would be fall ridged, and the tractor will just follow the ridges. So it's the big advantage is it's less prone to blowing, the dirt blowing, and we don't lose any moisture. We don't have irrigation water typically until about May the 7th to the 10th. So we do need to conserve moisture early on in the spring, especially if we go in with ranges and we try to get in late April or even mid-April, we need to conserve that moisture, and this is a great way of doing that.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Matt, what are you guys doing right now, and how's Tillage look at Oyster Cove Farms?
As I mentioned, we do use a residue tillage, basically a chisel plow with some finishing capacity, kind of as our main go-to. But the last few years, we've had such shifts in weather windows that we're finding we need probably 3 or 4 different strategies to meet the field and the weather. So ideally, we would go in September and burn down what is typically a forage crop. If it's early enough, spread a cover mix and then go in with the chisel plow and prepare that seed bed for the spring. If the weather's really cooperating, we have had some luck with fall ridging or fall hilling as well. I think, as you've seen, we've been able to make some nice cover on some fall ridges and come in and do one pass with a planter in the hiller in the spring. But the trouble with that is that we only get that 1 out of 4 years. So by and large, it's a pass in the fall. If if it's still early enough, a cover goes on. And then typically then in the spring, there'll be one more pass with that same chisel plow, all done on tram lines to let the planter work into that. And there's typically a good amount of residue left when we do that. So we have a little data on that suggests it is giving us some more moisture, but it's also been saving time, as you all know. When you can make that hill at the time of plant, the nutrients are all there, and you're ready to go. So the last 3 years, though, no single strategy has worked on all the acres. So we always find we're needing to fill gaps, and if you need to go late, what can we do? And if you need to go early, what can we do? So to me, having some flexibility with, we need a machine that has some discs, we need a machine with some shanks, and then we need a little bit of luck as well, is the way it's been going here.
And
But,
Matt, you have some rotation, like I know you have some longer rotation with some dairy farmers and beef farmers, and then you have some of your own land that maybe you're coming in after like annual crops in some cases, but then other cases you're coming in after multiple years of forage. So yeah, you have
That's
to
right.
put those fields a little differently sometimes in your number of tillage passes or when you're tilling.
Yeah. And I mean, anything where you have an annual or something that's not developed any sod, you can go in and do one pass and plan into that. And I mean, I'm even thinking in some situations that our planter with all the tillage that it has on it would plan into, lightly worked stubble, even if it had a subsoiler ran through it. So every year we've kind of been pushing everything a little farther and a little farther. And it seems like really by and large, we just don't need as much tillage in many situations. And I think we're seeing a benefit from that in the moisture economy of that season. I think we're just holding on to a bit more moisture.
So that's makes a great segue, Matt. You're talking a little bit about no-till planting or minimum till planting. Chad's been doing some interesting work on some minimum till or no-till potato planting into stubble in the last couple of years out at his place in Manitoba. So I'm just going to put a little video up that you shared with us here, Chad, and I'll get you to speak to that too, if that's all right. So yeah, I'll just start it here. Tell us a little bit about your new planter or the modifications to your planter.
It's basically a Spudnik planter with a hill former on the back of it, and it's got a heavy tillage bar in the front and some rippers in the back. We're going straight into canola stubble that's been deep ripped in the fall, but just with an eco-till, so it's very low disturbance. We're going in, we're planting, we're putting our phosphate down, our quadris and other micros going down there. This is the last pass we make in this field. The sprayers come in and make one herbicide pass, but other than that, this field is left alone till harvest like this. We're doing our best to prevent erosion. We have lots of wind erosion in our area. You can see these fields, they sit like this for 4 to 5 weeks waiting for the potatoes to emerge. And we get some Alberta winds here in Manitoba. And we found these fields, you can see there's stubble still standing there. It's just enough to hold the soil in place when the wind's blowing like this. We can't use it on every piece of ground we have. There's definitely a certain soil it's going to work on and certain soils it's not going to work on, and certain conditions. If it's wet, you're not going to want to do this. You're going to make a mess.
And Chad, were you able to measure? So, like, did you take some yield measurements on where you did this versus where your more traditional tillage? And was there really any difference?
Yeah, we did. This circle was split in half, and they actually Simplot had some soil probes in. We had a bunch of soil probes actually, and we tracked soil temperatures and soil moisture and yield right to the end. And yeah, the yield was very similar. There's a bit of topography difference, so it's hard to say, but yeah, it was a very equivalent field side to side. We did see a little bit lower or later emergence on it, maybe a day or two. And I attribute that mostly to putting dry dirt around the seed piece. We probably should have irrigated right after planting. Where the tilled field had nice moist soil all around the seed piece, the no-till had a drier bunch of dirt around the seed, and just took a little longer for it to get rolling. Quality-wise, there was no difference. It just looked a lot better not moving. No soil moving across the field.
Right. Have you made any other changes to your tillage practices in the last few years, or is this the major one?
That's a major one. We didn't deep rip here in the past, maybe 6, 7 years ago. We started ripping everything ahead to ground, and it's made a huge difference to our soil profile and keeping it loose. We rip every year before the potatoes on the farm. We've gone to dammer diking. A lot of our fields that are rolling topography will get the dammer diker through, and it'll just speed up with the pockets, and we don't hill again. It's just the pocket maker going through. And as we've got to more irrigation on the farm, we're up to about 2/3 irrigated across the whole farm now, and we've had to change some tillage practice there. We've definitely grown more crop and bigger crops, so our corn ground all has to be some kind of tillage on in the fall just to get the root balls to break down and stuff, so we're not dealing with it in potato crops in the future.
Great. Michelle, how has things changed you're at CP Farms the last few years with regards to tillage?
Well, if anything, we've tried to reduce tillage that was not needed. A blanket approach to the farm where we would go out and we have a Reuben 12 Lemken disc, which is that's a pretty heavy duty disc that we would use to disc after the grain was combined, and we don't do that anymore on the sandier soil. And the dammer decker that we use it's a Tillage Master, so it's got 13 shanks on a 6-row machine, and it does the same operation as a disc ripper would. So we go through and stand in grain stubble with the dammer diker and make our fall ridges, and then and we like to leave it fairly coarse. If anything, on most of the acres we run the cage rollers over top, but there's also a lot of acres where we take those cage rollers right off to leave as many lumps intact as we can and as much residue in that hill as we can. Like Chad mentioned, it does tend to get very windy here. The wind erosion is definitely something that our land owners that we trade land with do not want to see. So that's priority number one, to keep the land from blowing. And the dammer dikers, because we plant all our rows north south, has been helping us with preventing wind erosion. When the wind comes from the west, we don't really have a lot of issues with the land blowing. Even if we leave it like what you see in the picture there, that's power hilled ground, that's re-hilled with the planter, and then we just make the pockets. We make pockets on every acre, no matter if it's flat land or rolling land. We make it on every acre because we have learned if you get a 3-inch rainstorm, then no matter how flat your land is, we will still have lakes, is what we have learned. So we make pockets on every acre. This machine that you see in the picture here, that's not our Tillage Master. It's just our pocket maker, but it's one of the most used machines on the farm. We also use it as a markout bar for fields that are very, very, that don't need any tillage, and then we just mark out the rows in the spring and plant. But we don't do so we would still need a separate pass for that versus what Chad does all in one. So our European planter is not equipped to handle tons and tons of standing stubble. So
Right. And Matt, you talked a little bit about before things that you've been doing. How are things changed tillage wise on your farm in the last, say, 2 or 3 years? And maybe how has changes in your rotation necessitated changes in tillage?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as I'd mentioned, we're kind of at a place now where we have to stagger everything. So we'll try and do so many 100 acres with the cover crop. We'll do the next 100 maybe a bit later, and try and use a higher residue, or um, in some cases we'll leave ground till the spring. But I think what's changed in terms of the technology is really trying to leverage GPS. So our subsoil or our ripper is right on our potato rows. So when we can, we'll insert that. Um, as the last thing we do before we plant, if possible. And we're even thinking now we might need to do it at plant, because the structure of our soil is such that it tends to sink back into itself after we do it in the fall. So we've been finding that even though we're adding that, that loosening up right in the root zone for next year, we're not always getting it to last until the planter makes its way over. So um, we're kind of easing our way into that whole tramline vertical tillage system, but still trying to piece together the order in which everything needs to go, so that when you reach down into the soil after the planter goes over, you can feel that looseness, and you know that the roots have somewhere to go. And I think when we do achieve that, we're seeing some pretty big gains. So it's minimization of tillage passes, but it's also controlling where all the traffic is and trying to keep that row where the action's happening as loose and um, as welcoming to new growth as possible, to put it plainly.
And what's your thoughts regarding, like, say, dealing with deeper compaction? Are you doing some, separate ripping, or are you trying to have, maybe your crop do some of that work for you, or a combination of both?
If we get the chance to do good ripping when it's dry in the summer, then we will. But typically, if we're going to rip it, when we're not ripping right into a potato crop, if we were going to rip, we'd want to get some living roots down in there to stabilize those lines so they don't sink back into themselves. And that is usually hard to do, because when it's dry, we're not going to seed anything. But then we'll end up with 50 or 60 mils of rain, and it'll be great for seeding and too wet for ripping. So to me, we're getting, there's more potential in trying to fold that into our planting operation. That's when we need that depth and that profile the most. So that's what I've been finding. And we're still not clear here whether ripping, away from the potato row is actually helping with the way our soil's structured. It may be that our frost cycles and the fact that we have very shallow soil are reversing a lot of the compaction that we could be targeting, and then what we can't target is just lost anyway.
Right.
I guess that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks. And Homer, I was successful in getting the video up that you sent me on your new planter or new prototype here. So I'm just going to play it. And if you want to talk us through it a little bit.
Well, let's just work backwards from this slide. Sure. So that's our prototype 4-row that we started with last spring. And the idea was to go into that much rye and see what we could do. So, and right there, we're actually deep ripping. You can hardly see the deep shank in front of the shoe, but the first coulters are just for trash flow. We've actually, just trying to see which version that is. We've actually got fertilizer openers behind the shoe. We're actually dry banding 800 pounds of fertilizer after the shoe. So those dry openers have been about 4 different places on that planter, and we're glad that we only started as a 4-row, because it was a lot of work. We just did a couple hundred acres with it last year in various fields to see what we could learn, right? So, and in a general sense, I'm glad we did all the work because we learned a ton and learned that we really have to make a lot of adjustments because we're trying to do a whole lot in 6 or 7 feet from the front of that planter to the back of that planter, right? So that field was just sprayed with Roundup just like the day before we were planting. And you don't, I had to clip the video to send it to you, but there's a hiller on the back of that planter similar to Chad's planter. So round 2, what we're doing right now in the shop is we're building that out to an 8-row with folding wings for transport. And we have dry fertilizer and 2 liquids going on with that same process. So that'll be that's what we're hoping to plant half of our lightest acres with this coming year. So that's our newest program. So that's just in the works.
What other have you been making any other changes in terms of equipment? You're obviously you've got a good head for equipment, and with your past with HJV2. So what other things have you been tinkering with?
Well, the predecessor to all that was our system that we've been developing for almost 15 years previous, which was that fall ridging, which really started. It's really a very circuitous route to where we got to minimum tillage, but it really started with our scab problem and our light soils and our tight rotation. So it all started with having to learn how to fumigate with chloropicrin to control scab. So to figure out how to fall fumigate, we had to figure out how to zone fertilize, right? And minimum till plant, right? So that was the evolution that taught us or forced us to figure out how to fall mark and spring apply banded fertilizers. We didn't want to be completely liquid because we felt there was a pretty heavy price penalty for going all liquid for our fertilizers. So in the process of all that, we've had better chip varieties. Our scab problems have been solved by varietal selection. So we've actually gone away from chloropicrin, but we've also figured out that using Vapam is like a third the price, and we're getting a lot of benefit from that. So it's a whole chain of events really that have allowed us to learn how to fumigate, learn how to band fertilizer, learn how to do controlled tillage and controlled traffic. And really we've reduced a lot of tractor hours and man hours, and our logistics have actually simplified considerably because we're doing a lot of our heavy work in the fall, and now in the spring the planter can go out right behind the ridger and they can skip the wet parts of the field. It just don't even need GPS on the planter in a general sense because the rows are right there. Just lots of sort of minor benefits to our system. And when we've done all that, I wasn't satisfied. So that's why we've started to build this newest planter to even in the spring just to get down to one single pass where we could do everything, right? So it's always a moving target and continuous improvement, right? So
No, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
We've done a little bit of work on fall planting or fall hilling here in Prince Edward Island as well in the last few years, and without fumigation, but just trying to see what effect, whether we see a yield improvement from making the ridges in the fall as opposed and using a cover crop as opposed to just or what normally people do here in Prince Edward Island in the spring. And over 3 years, we're seeing maybe a slight trend towards a slight improvement in yield. Fields maybe dry out a little faster, but carry a little more moisture later in the season. And it looks like it might be somewhere around a 15 to 20 hundredweight yield bump comparatively. So it's not massive changes, but it might be enough for some people if they can move some of their tillage to earlier in the season, or early the fall before, and get a cover crop established, and then just be able to plant into those hills fairly easily the next spring. There might be some operational efficiencies as well as the same or better yield. So it's kind of an interesting, some interesting work we've been doing, and it's by no means is that revolutionary, as you guys have showed. Some of you guys are ahead of us for a while on making ridging in the fall and making those hills in the fall, and it seems to be working for you. So going forward, I'd like to ask, where do we go from here? What do people think? What does the next 3 or 4 years look like on your farms with regards to tillage? Are you, looking at any additional technology, any changes in equipment beyond what we've already talked about, or changes in your rotation to address, a desire to reduce tillage or just change things up, or are you changing how you're measuring the impact of your tillage? Maybe tractors that monitor fuel consumption or how hard they work, or some of those sorts of things. Just curious as to where you're kind of going from here. So I'll start with Michelle.
Okay, I think what we're going to see here in the near future is not a very big change. We're pretty happy with the system that we got going on. The equipment that we or the other members on the panel here use it's been growing in weight. Everything is getting heavier. We want to avoid driving very heavy equipment through freshly prepared potato rows. I think the combination of tillage and planting is going to be making more headway out here, where we eliminate any driving over the fall bedded rows, so that where we went with those shanks on the fall bedders, that we do not compact where the seed piece goes. And Chad talked about how he does everything. He does the stripping in the standing canola stubble, and we'll see some of that going on here too, where we will do our deep tillage if that's needed somewhere, and then not drive over it anymore. So basically a form of controlled traffic. I also think that compaction out here, our compaction is mainly done after sugar beets. Sugar beets are a very high yielding crop, and they require a lot of truck traffic to get them off the fields. The sugar beets have no place in the rotation before potatoes. Sometimes you're forced to shuffle things around, of course. We do see intensive tillage that we need after beets, but for the rest, we're going to try to reduce the amount of tillage that's needed to prepare a potato land, and use some form of controlled traffic. With the GPSs, we run all our equipment on the farm is from the same family, and we can connect all our equipment together and make sure that we use all the same AB lines and whatnot, and not trample or drive through areas of the field that are going to receive crop later. That's what I see happening here, and hopefully we'll see a yield bump because of that.
That's great. Matt, where do you see your future changes in operation, or how do things look at your farm going forward?
Well, I don't think we're going to spend too much more money if we can help it, but we'll continue making some modifications, like adding maybe a deeper shank on our planter to see if we can get that root zone loosened up even a little more. There's always more work we can do on integrating all of our equipment into one GPS setup, so that everything's on the same set of train tracks as was pointed out. We still have a lot of work to do on no-till and one-pass or min-till. I don't know if you saw it in one of the slides. We have an old drill we've been playing with, and we're able to do things like seed peas into rye without going in ahead of that, or potentially even running our ripper on a field of potatoes we did harvest and leaving some rye in there and planting something else in between. We're just finding that with the way that the winds have been blowing and the weather, we're trying to figure out how to keep cover and residue on the ground all the time and still manage to tuck some cash crops underneath. So it's cheap and dirty modifications, and trying to keep equipment light. We've been lightening up equipment as much as we can and making lighter pieces go wider, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're just going to keep trying to push what we've been doing and make the most out of some of the infrastructure that we do have.
And you mentioned that you're adding a lot more cover crops into the rotation. I know I've done some work with you on that. You're seeing what do you think is the biggest advantage of those cover crops in your system?
Well, it's protection, and I think that cover crops and tillage are, in kind of the same equipment in some sense. When you add a cover crop before or after tillage, it seems to change the way that the tillage equipment works, and in many cases, I think kind of blunt the tillage a bit, so you're still mixing soil and getting good tilth, but you're not pulverizing soil aggregates. And to me, if we can go in the spring and still see those ridges that the leveling baskets left in the spring, then that's a good sign that we are helping to keep aggregate stability where it is. And to me, that's largely what we're trying to manage with tillage. Is we need our machinery to go through it, but we can't let it break down so much that when water hits it, everything shrinks up, and then roots can't do what they need to do. So it's by and large a balancing act between too little and too much.
Right. Homer, you've given us a really good overview of some of the innovative changes you've made. What's sort of next on your list?
Well, like I said, we're kind of right in the middle of our min-till planter project. So this year is gonna see how it works with out to 8 rows with 8 big shanks in the row. So we're realizing we're gonna need a lot of pull, and so we're gonna try actually a wide track 2-track tractor to see how that works, just as one component. Another component of that planter is that it's just got a central fill hopper, both for potatoes and dry fertilizer, each on load cells. So we're designing it so that we only ever carry just the amount of seed we need to do one round, and then with a batch filler, so that we don't waste time filling, but are only carrying the minimum hundredweight across the field, again, to minimize compaction and reduce our draft, because we'll be drafting heavy enough, pulling 8 deep shanks in the center of the row and 9 shanks loosening the valleys right after the planter's gone over, right? So that's one thing. And then like another thing that we're sort of is an evolution here is we're introducing corn into our rotation. And so it's a challenge to combine, our best, not our average, but our best crops of corn can be, 220 bushels. So they're combining that late in October. So we've learned that the right chopping corn head is critical to then, because we then want to go in the next day and do our fall ridging and fumigating, and then really then no passes in the spring. And it looks pretty wild planting into a whole bunch of corn trash. But surprisingly, if you make it black in the fall, if you have enough soil health and biology going on, enough irrigation, and our harvesters are better, come harvest, we are actually able to manage that trash. There is a lot of trash, and a little bit of it makes the trip to the storage, but really it's not consequential. So we've been just kind of navigating that. It's multifaceted, right? Because you change one thing, you fix one thing, something else, and then a new problem pops up, right? So it's you're always just moving the cheese, right? So
Yep. That's very interesting. I know there's a bit of more interest in corn here in Prince Edward Island as well, but that's the same thing as the not combining until late and managing that trash. So it's that's something to be considered as people are thinking about their tillage options as well. Chad, how about you? What's the future look like at your place in terms of how you're approaching tillage?
Well, we're going to carry on working with the 1-pass planting as much ground as we can and see how we make out with that. We're definitely going to work more on our cover crops. We probably have maybe 1,000 acres a year in cover crops, and we're going to try and increase that and keep as much of the farm green as we can. We're going over a project right now where we're mapping the whole farm with GPS, mapping all our circles, mapping all of our fields, getting all our AB lines pre-populated and everything. so that when the machinery goes to the field, it's going to be tracking in the same tracks again. The row is going to be in the same spot every year. It's a big project to get everything mapped right on, and doing that, we're going to go to a single row shut off on our planters so that our circles will be marked perfect. We end up with weed problems on the corners of our circles when we have gaps of black dirt there, and we have trouble controlling nightshade in those areas. So we're hoping to improve that. Seen some of the work done down east on cover crops in the spring on fields. We're going to try some of that this spring, sowing some cereals on top of the hills after they're planted and see if we can hold some dirt in place that way. Yeah, that's the main changes we're going to make in the near future. I'm going to keep watching these other 3 farms. There's lots of interesting stuff happening. That's our main changes, right?
Yeah, there's a lot. Everybody's doing lots of very interesting things, and it's we can always learn from each other and see what works in one place and try it in another. So before
I think we could work towards banding some more fertilizer.
Okay.
That's one thing I think area could change a little bit on. Most of the fertilizer is broadcast, and it's definitely not the most efficient use of it.
Right. So before I close, does anybody have anything else that I didn't ask them about that they think would be interesting to share, or that we didn't cover that would be timely to talk about?
Well, I have a question actually more than anything else. We've been in a very gentle way been told by our processors to try to eliminate corn, especially the year before, but even preferably 2 years before we bring our crop into the storage. And that might have something to do with the fact that we don't wash on our way out. I think Homer and most of the other chip growers, they're washing on their way out, but our processors do not like to see corn in the rotation. We have actually been backing off our corn acres. We have tried to plant potatoes into corn stover, and with the equipment that we run, we find that very, very hard to do. Corn silage is fine, but grain corn, I mean, the amount of residue that produces, and then even if you have a good chopping corn head or you mow the stubble after, there's way too much residue, and the factories are complaining a lot about the cobs, especially not as much the root balls, but they do not like the cobs because they're hard to detect. They're almost the same density as potatoes once they have some dirt on them. And they have told us very, very nicely that they do not like to have potatoes follow corn. I'm not sure if Homer has any comments on that, but that's what we heard. So,
well, we haven't, just like you pointed out, we wash and we've not had any processor complaints. I mean, our processors will quickly tell us if there's any foreign material in our loads. So we have like the strictest. We have a zero tolerance. So, but we're somehow making it work. Whether we're lucky or good management or good luck, I couldn't tell you. But between our process and typically with our barrel washer, our floating debris removal, and our optical sorter, nothing's getting through. And it typically has not even been. There's very little that comes to the wash point. I mean, we actually are getting most of it out on the way into storage. So I don't know what the difference really might be. Maybe our moisture level in our fields through the winter months is probably higher than yours, Michelle. So maybe that's the difference, that we're getting a head start on the breakdown. That's just a guess.
I would guess that the wetter soil has a huge role to play in that, because our sandy stuff doesn't break down very fast. Our heavier dirt breaks down a lot faster. We typically would be a year ahead on corn. We would never be a year before.
Very good. Well, I want to thank each of you for taking the time to talk to me about this today and sharing your thoughts with Canadian potato growers. Lots of diversity from east to west here in terms of how things are being managed, but also lots of commonality too, in terms of each of you are trying innovative ways to look at minimizing soil disturbance as much as possible and retaining moisture and building soil health, while also some of the cost savings that come with fewer trips over the field. So I think there's quite a bit of commonality there, but maybe trying some things in some innovative ways. So thanks very much for talking to me today and talking to all those that are listening. And good luck for the 2021 growing season for each of you. I hope it's all a very successful year, that you only get the best of weather.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Ryan.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Nice talking to you guys.
Thanks, guys. That was a really great grower panel. It sounds like you're all doing some really interesting work on your farms.